Media Without Means. Today, I'm joined by Anna Malindog-Uy. She is the Vice President and Director at the Asian Center Philippine Strategic Studies Institute and a PhD candidate in economics at the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development at Peking University in Beijing. And together with her is Jerry Gray, somebody that you know in my channel and from a lot of content that I've made before. And together we're going to be asking Anna a few questions about the Philippines and what is taking place over these days. So first of all, a welcome to Anna. Anna, if we could talk a little bit about your introduction. Tell us a little bit about you to our audiences.
Okay, thank you so much, Jerry, and thank you, Fernando, for inviting me to your program and at this platform. I'm Anna Malindog-Uy. As Jerry have said, I'm taking my PhD. I'm actually right now in my writing of my PhD dissertation, and it has something to do with the South China Sea, but it's being approached in an economic sense or economic lens. And at the same time, I'm also a human rights activist. I'm also um, I'm a consultant of some NGOs and a writer. I'm a columnist of Manila Times. So every Saturday I published. It's all about perspective on global issues, local and national issues, but basically it's more on geopolitics, international relations, and economics. So it's pretty much my background, I think, at this time.
Okay, and also a welcome to Jerry. And perhaps what I would do is I would let Jerry kickstart our conversation with a short introduction for those of you who don't know you, Jerry, in Media Without Means, and some of the questions that you may have for Anna.
Yes, basically some of my questions are going to be based around the Duterte, or Marcos and Duterte situation, but particularly the Marcos family. I've worked with you for a lot, so I think most people who are watching this will know who I am. But I've lived in China 20 years. I came here a long time ago as a kind of anti-China person for a short period of time. Realized that I'd been misled and misunderstood a lot of things about China. And since I retired from full-time work, I've made a social media presence trying to refute the misinformation. So that's what I do on China. And there's a hell of a lot of misinformation about the South China Seas, which, Anna, you're the expert on. So we're going to get to that later on in the show. First of all, Marcos Duterte, the two people who are probably the most anti-two personalities in the whole of the Philippines are sharing the platform, the administration as president, vice president. How did that happen?
Oh, well, they are quite, the history behind the two has something to do with the May 2020 national election. During the time, I think there was a joint forces between the two families. And these are, at this time in our political history, in our political landscape, these are the families that are very strong in terms of support base and in terms of popularity. So in the May 2022 national election, they run in one ticket, and of course they won landslide. I think the current president Bongbong Marcos got 31 million votes, and I think Sara Duterte got 32 million votes. However, this kind of unit team, they call themselves a unit team, was only good for roughly a year. But after a year, it became rocky to a certain extent because there are certain elements in the side of the current president who would want to a certain extent, kind of did something to, paint the vice president in a way that is not good, by accusing her of many things. Like, for example, now there is an accusation of some kind of corruption in terms of the confidential fund of the vice president and many other things. But I think these are all political intimidation and political harassment, because the way I see it, the current Marcos administration, the Marcoses, and even the Romualdezes, because the Romualdez the Speaker of the House is a Romualdez, which is the cousin of the current president. I think they see Sara Duterte as the presidential front runner, even in the next coming presidential election, and that would be May 2028. So, and also in the last May 2022 election, she was also the front runner, but she decided to run as vice president, and she helped Bongbong Marcos in the presidency. That's why Bongbong Marcos won. Without the Duterte votes, I don't think, or the Duterte supporters, I don't think Bongbong Marcos would win in that election. So at this time, it seems like there is this, the way I see it, politically speaking, and in terms of analysis, there is this sense of I think the Marcoses and the Romualdez, they would want to perpetuate themselves in power in the same manner that happened in history. Like, for
Yes.
example, Marcos Sr. stayed in power for 21 years, and they would want to have a recreation of this or a reenactment of this by changing the constitution, or by, probably in the 2028 election, they would have someone who will run still from the family. So, but the problem to that kind of ambition or kind of projection, politically speaking, by the Marcoses and the Romualdezes is Sara Duterte is still the front runner in the 2028 election, even in the survey. So how would you perpetuate yourself in power if you have someone like her that is some kind is of a block to your ambition? The only way to do that is to impeach the vice president. And now you have two
Discredit. Yeah.
impeachment cases being filed against the vice president at the House of Representatives. She is facing a lot of congressional hearings, political intimidation, and political harassment, and painting her as if she is a corrupt politician to a greater extent. But Filipinos like me would understand that these are all part of politics, and these are all part of trying to eliminate the vice president in the presidential race in the 2028 national election, and trying to put the Duterte kind of popularity to a low, or to reduce it drastically by painting the Duterte as the bad guys now in the Philippines, in a way that's like, for example, telling there's a congressional hearing at the moment against the previous administration fight against illegal drugs, and they're trying to paint it in some way that is a human rights violation and all of this, and there's an ICC thing. So everything is there, and the whole forces of the government is like they're pushing to the wall the current vice president Sara Duterte. So that's pretty much the situation, but in terms of political dynamics in my country. But that is beside the point, because if you look at the country at the moment, also it's really facing a lot of difficulties in terms of economics, in terms of current rising crimes, high prices of goods. The peso is also the peso, I think, is very weak compared to the dollar, and it affects our economy. So there's a lot of domestic issues that is happening, plus this political tension between two biggest family in the Philippines, plus a foreign policy that is defective and very much leaning to the United States. So if you put them together, it seems that the Philippines is facing a lot of challenges and problems, and it seems that our situation is not necessarily positive. It's a bit negative in that sense.
It is very interesting to me to see this ticket of Duterte and Marcos going together. I remember in a podcast that you did with geopolitical trends just a few days ago with Dr. David Ulala, you mentioned that she was much more popular than Marcos. So my question was, who were the other candidates that actually required them to go together? I mean, who were they against, and did they win by a landslide? Why was there a need for them to join forces? That's basically my question. Was the competition that fierce?
I think during that time, before the May 2022 election, I think there were some politicians who were trying to broker the tandem of Duterte and Marcos, because if the bailiwick in terms of political machinery, and the bailiwick of the Marcos is in the north, while Sara is in the south, which is the Mindanao, and you have the swing votes. But if you really, so there were a lot of politicians trying to put them together to ensure victory and to ensure landslide victory for both of them. But I want to qualify this, because the former president, the father of Sara Duterte, actually did not agree with this kind of ticket. he did not support Bongbong Marcos in the election. He was very clear. He doesn't like Bongbong Marcos. He had his own reasons. But on the other hand, it seems Sara, actually, the former president wants Sara Duterte to run for president. But the problem is Sara decided to run as vice president and help Bongbong Marcos to win, because that is really the case. She was courted by the sister of Bongbong Marcos, who I think is her friend. That, we need your help. We need you for Bongbong Marcos to win. And I think in the mind of Sara Duterte, this is just my analysis, is probably she accepted that kind of agreement and kind of unity, quote unquote, because probably she was thinking that whatever her father have started, it will be pursued by the Marcos administration if Bongbong Marcos win. Like, for example, an independent foreign policy, the Build projects, the infrastructure development project that was started by her father, Rodrigo Duterte, that, because I'm the vice president, you're my president, we can talk this out and probably you will pursue and everything that my father have started, something to that effect. But what happened was the reverse. Nothing really happened. It was, Bongbong Marcos have a 180-degree pivot when it comes to foreign policy. He did not really follow through with the Build project, which is infrastructure. And in terms of the fight against illegal drugs, there's no such thing at the moment. And as you can see, drug problems are rising, criminalities are rising. So in terms also of relationship with China, he promised in the campaign that he will pursue a very constructive relationship with China, especially in the economic front, and his foreign policy will be independent, and he will have an equidistance between the United States and China. But it never happened. As you can see, our diplomatic relation and political relation with China is not good at all. It's not just about the South China Sea. It's really more about that strong, heavy influence of the United States under the current administration of Bongbong Marcos. So this is really the dynamics. But when you talk about the ticket in the May 2020 election, there were certain politicians that really tried to put them together and convince them that this is the best possible scenario for the country, that you have a very popular vice president and a very popular president. And when you talk about policy, since both of them are very popular, well supported by the majority of the Filipinos, or almost all Filipinos, then everything will be easier when it comes to passing policy, implementation of policy. There will be legitimacy because people would believe them and would put their trust on them, because both of them are well supported by Filipino people. And we thought, even I thought that Bongbong Marcos will follow through his campaign promises. And I think also the vice president have that kind of impression or thoughts. But that never happened, really. It's the complete reverse of what is going on in the country right now. And Bongbong Marcos did not follow or did not even try his best to meet or to even fulfill the promises that he said during the campaign. And now you can see that the two are not anymore friends. They are really from opposing poles, and you can see the exchanges of words in media.
Yeah.
And now the vice president is facing 2 impeachment cases in the House of Representatives. And one thing that we have to remember, the House of Representatives is controlled by the Marcoses. I mean, the president has a hand on the House of Representatives because the speaker is the cousin of the president. So in a way, you can see the dynamics between the two, the vice president, the presidents are not good. And I think Sara Duterte is being pushed to the wall at this time. Imagine the whole government of Bongbong Marcos is now ready to fight against the vice president. And she's facing a lot of cases, legal cases being filed against her. So that is pretty much the situation in my country at the moment. When you talk about political dynamics, when you talk about the two very popular but very strong, that both of them have a strong voting base or supporters thus far. But I think I would qualify that too. But I think when you talk about support, I think Sara or the Duterte has more support. Majority of Filipinos, I think, support. Well, is on the side, I think, are more on the side of the Duterte. However, um, BBM or Bongo Marcos, he has the support of the politicians. Majority of the
And the
politicians are on
Americans.
his side because he has the money, Of course, the
Well,
administration.
that's a question I wanted to come to, Anna, if I can. Do you think, I mean, he made these promises, he made these commitments, and it did look like when he was first elected, his first visit was to China, where he met
Beijing.
with his uncle Xi, and this was all looking quite positive for a couple of months, and then it really started to unravel. Is there any indication as to what it was that? I mean, the rumor, the gossip, the speculation is his money is locked away in the United States, where I believe another cousin is the ambassador to the United
Ambassador to the
States.
United States, yeah.
Another cousin, yeah. So all of his money is locked away in the United States. Do you think that influenced all of these changes, or is there something else?
Well, many Filipinos, I cannot confirm that though, because I need to have proof for that. But
Yeah.
Dr. David O actually said that he knows about these things, and he said that, yeah, your speculation is correct, actually, that I know. He said, I personally know. I had an interview with him. But this is one of the reasons, this is one of the speculations that are playing in the minds of many Filipinos, even analysts, that, but probably that Marcos Jr., that 180-degree pivot, um, and having a foreign policy and that is very much leaning to the United States. And yes, you can see the United States really has a hand on his administration is one of the speculations right now. One of the possible reasons or that could explain that is, yeah, there's a deal between him and Biden that, the frozen asset could be released in a way if he will follow the dictates of the United States. But as of the moment, that is a speculation. But as far as Dr. David O is concerned, it is not a speculation, but it is correct. Yeah, he told me so. And I was like, really? Oh, wow, my God. So it means this is not a speculation. But that's another thing I think is, I think the Marcos Jr. is also relying on the United States to survive politically speaking in terms of backing domestically. Because as you can see right now, his trust rating is going down. There are Filipinos who are on the streets clamoring for his resignation. It's not because of the Duterte thing. It's not really because of the vice president. It's really because of the situation of the country that many Filipinos can see that there's a latent and massive corruption in the country. There's a lot of problem when you talk about rising prices of goods, basic goods. Rice is too expensive. And Filipinos are having a difficulty surviving. And you have basic necessities like water, electricity, transportation. All of these are very expensive. And that is not supposed to be the case because many of his promises has something to do with, he said that, when I become president, I will make it sure that rice for 1 kilo is only 20 pesos. But right now it's almost like 58 pesos. So, there are really a lot of domestic issues and a lot of his campaign promises that were not met. And it's not yet there. And there's a lot of corruption. So Filipinos are clamoring for change. And so they're asking for BBM to resign. There are, of course, he has supporters, but there are a lot of people, ordinary people, that really want him out of office. And there are protests on the streets calling for his resignation. So this is pretty much the case. But so he needs to survive politically speaking, domestically speaking, and I think he needs the backing of the United States on this. Because I don't deny the fact that still the Philippines is the long-standing outpost, militarily speaking, an ally of the United States in the Asia-Pacific region. And when you talk about influence, even on our domestic policy, the Americans really has that kind of influence, especially in this administration. It was not the same in the previous administration of Rodrigo Duterte, because the Duterte, he really, even until now, he doesn't want the Americans to influence on how he run the country. He wants it that it should be Filipinos who should make decision for our own country. But when Marcos Jr. assumed office after a little bit, maybe after 6 months of being in office, things change really, and it becomes more evident that his administration is more guided, influenced by the United States. The American presence in my country so it's very
Some would
prominent.
say
Yeah,
beholden. Some would say
beholden, of
beholden
course.
to the United States.
Yes, a
Something
Anna, I
that
wanted
president
to.
worries me.
beholden to the United States and a government that is beholden to the United States, I think.
Jerry?
I've got something that worries me about this because we know that the Philippines has a one-term limit president, 6 years, one term, and that will come to an end in May 2028, as you've said. What happens in May 2028? You've already said that the Sarah Duterte is coming up for some problems. She's potentially impeachment. So if she's not able to stand, or if she's even in prison, or whatever happens to her, what's likely to happen when the election comes around in May? It's only 2.5 years away. Then we've got another election. The Americans have invested so much money into the situation they now have, and we know that. That's not speculation, that's a fact. They're investing billions in making the Philippines their outpost again, because it used to be, then it wasn't, and now it is again. So what are the Americans going to do? How is this going to end in 2.5 years when Marcos isn't just going to go away quietly, is he?
No, I don't think so. Because there's actually, right now, if you really look at the domestic politics, there is a sense of, I mean, we can sense that they would want to perpetuate themselves in power. And one way to do that is not only through election, but changing the constitution. There are moves right now in our House of Representative, and it has been there for the longest time, that they would want to change the constitution from a presidential to a parliamentary form of government. And we know that in a parliamentary, the prime minister is not necessarily directly elected by the people, only the parliament, the members of parliament. So that is one move that they're thinking at the moment, that before the end term of Bongo Marcos, they will be able to change the constitution. And one thing that you have to remember, in terms of numbers, they have the numbers in the House of Representatives. And in the Senate, I would not say the whole Senate would agree to this, but of course, I think they have also certain numbers in the Senate in terms of voting, because they need the senators needs to vote. And the crucial point is the midterm election that will happen next year, 2025. Because if the ticket that Marcos Jr. is supporting in the senatorial race will win majority of them, then they will have majority numbers in the Senate. So whatever kind of policy, may it be impeachment, may it be a change in constitution that they would want to push through before the end term of Bongbong Marcos, then it will happen. The possibility and the potential that it will happen is really huge, and it's there. So if there's a change in constitution, the possibility for the Marcoses / Romualdez to stay in power is there. It's a potential that might happen. So maybe we will not have really a national election that we will be voting for directly for who will be the head of state or the head of government, but probably there will be a change in our form of government. That's a possibility. But of course, Filipinos would never want to, we don't want that. As you can see, there are already clamor for some kind of opposition to a change of constitution. The Filipinos, as much as possible, especially the enlightened ones, we don't want a change of constitution at this time under Bongbong Marcos. We want a change of constitution. That's one thing, because our current constitution has many loopholes and defective in some ways. But we want it not this time. In another time that we can assure that the president is not interested in perpetuating themselves in himself in power or herself in power. But at this time, under Bongbong Marcos, we don't want it. And so that's one possibility. The other possibility, if there would not be a change in constitution, or they will not be able to push through with it, is, of course, either one of the family members of the Marcoses / Romualdez will run for office. That's a possibility. Or someone that the Americans would want to be their puppet will be financed and will be pushed to run for office. And that someone is still not clear, but we have certain politicians in mind that probably the United States is already trying to, groom to a greater extent. Who can possibly replace a Marcos / Romualdez candidate? But that is one possibility. But for us, we are more worried about the change of constitution, and they will stay, and they would want to stay in power more than 21, more than to beat the record of the father. Because father stayed 21 years. Probably they want to stay more than 21 years. So that's something that we don't want as Filipinos, as much as
Anna,
possible.
you've talked a few times about the Constitution, and I want to ask you a very direct question.
Mm.
There's some allegations of drug use by the president. Is there anything in the laws of the Philippines that can compel him to do a follicle test, or to determine whether he has used drugs or not? Is there anything that can force him to take that test, or he can just write it out and never get it done?
That is a very tricky situation because there are allegations against the president. These are allegations,
Mhm.
and it's out there. It's in social media. Many Filipinos actually are open and vocal talking about this. That the allegation is that the president is a drug user or
Mhm.
slash addict to a greater extent. But these are allegations, no?
Mm.
So, but some people would say that it's true, some people would say that it's not. But at the end of the day, this is also a problem in terms of the moral ascendancy and integrity of the presidency, of the office of the president, and of the president. So, actually, there's a call for him to take a drug test to put a stop to this issue first and foremost, and for people to focus on what is important, and that is governance and taking care of, taking care of whatever kind of governmental functions that he needs to attend to. Because right now, Filipino are focusing on this kind of personal issue. That's a personal issue as far as I'm concerned. However, the president is not taking it seriously, and I don't know why. And he kind
Mm.
of set it aside as an issue. But in our constitution, there is no explicit provision on this that you can push him,
Okay.
really. There's none explicit. However, it's an issue of public trust and it's an issue of health of the president because drug use may be an allegation. It's still related to health and it's related to the mental health of a person, and it's an issue of public trust. And in this too, there are provision in the constitution that you should not deceive the public. You should honor the trust given to you by the public. However, even we have those things, we have those provisions in our constitution. At the end of the day, it's still on the
Nothing.
side of the president. How he gonna, address this kind of allegation? But at the moment, it seems that he just set it aside as if it does not exist, and he laughed about it. But people
Mm.
like me, it's not a laughing matter. I'm not saying that it's true, but what I'm saying is these are allegations that needs to be settled and needs to be addressed by a sitting president because it taints the office of the president. It's not just about him. It's about the presidency. It's the office of the president that is now tainted because of this allegation and the public trust being that we have for that office. So that is the matter. That's the issue. And even in my column in last Saturday, I'm saying that the president should take this seriously and do a drug test. It's not hard to do a drug test. You just go and it's a hair follicle test and that's it. In maybe in 1 hour you have the test and show it to the public. Make it public. So what's wrong with that? Anyone, even I, if you ask me for a drug test, I'll do that anytime. But the
You do
problem
that because you haven't taken drugs.
probably. Well, I don't definitely know.
Neither do I. I'm quite happy. You can take some of mine too.
I mean,
You can't take
anytime,
much of Fernando's though.
So
All
that's
right.
the question of many people, even of Filipinos, ordinary. Why is it hard for him to do it when it's
Yeah.
not? It's not a rocket science. It's a procedure that you can do it in 1 hour and you have the result and you just have to publicize the result and that's it. Everything's settled. But he
It's
seems
not.
not to,
It's only settled if he's not taking drugs.
Exactly. It is very easy, but he's making it difficult for a reason. Anna, I wanted to pivot a little bit into your expertise, which is the South China Sea. Um, One of the things that I recall from my time here in China is that during the Duterte presidency, things between China and the Philippines seem to be relatively smooth. But ever since Bongbong Marcos became president, and after he went to Washington, after having visited Beijing, um, things started to get rocky.
Mhm.
My question is, Why do you think that is? And what do you think is the role that the Philippines is going to play in all these South China Sea disputes? Of course, there's history, and of course, there's present. So, could you talk us a little bit about the present, Bongbong Marcos and the South China Sea um, rocky situation that we find nowadays with the Sierra Madre, with all these encounters with the different Coast Guard? What is your perspective on the situation, and where have we been misinformed about the situation?
I think the South China Sea is a very delicate situation. If you look at the Asia Pacific region, it is one of the flashpoint. We have three flashpoint in Asia Pacific. You have the South China Sea, you have Taiwan Strait, and the Korean Peninsula. But the South China Sea right now is more prominent, I think. It's precisely because of this kind of clash between China and the Philippines under a Bongbong Marcos administration. The thing here is like this. During Duterte time, it was very clear in our foreign policy that we will pursue balance, independent as much as possible, and equidistance with all major and great powers in the region. And with regard to China, very clear. We will have cooperation on areas that we already have good relation and cooperation, but on the issue of the South China Sea, that's a separate treatment, and we will deal with it quietly, diplomatically, and peacefully. And that was really evident. So the whole 6 years of Duterte was very good, and there was no megaphone diplomacy policy. But one thing also that is very clear during the Duterte administration, he never allowed the United States to dictate for our foreign policy or even the policies of the country. He was very strong on that. That's why the Americans will never want to have another Duterte as a president of my country. That's why they will never allow Sara Duterte to be president of the country, because precisely they cannot control this kind of people. They are very independent minded, and they have this strong stand for what you call independence of the country. And they have a very their understanding of our history, especially the colonization period, was very strong, especially the former president Rodrigo Duterte. But right now, our relationship with China is not good, politically, diplomatically speaking. The South China Sea issue is actually not just an issue between the Philippines and China. There are other claimant states, but it's very weird that it's only us, the Philippines and China, that are so noisy and always have skirmishes in the South China Sea, while Vietnam, Malaysia, and others are not. They are quite happy, and they kind of have this functional cooperation, but they still have the dispute. But on our side, it's not like that. There's one element in there, and that's the United States. The United States really is using the Philippines against China, using the issue of the South China Sea. In terms of how we approach the South China Sea, it's more the approach of the United States. Very noisy, megaphone diplomacy. Everything has to be out in public, and there are elements in our local politics and even in our domestic situation that someone like Ray Powell, who are kind of very prominent in our media, who talks about what we're gonna do as a country in terms of how we're gonna approach the South China Sea issue, and he is an American, and I think he's a CIA operative too. But he is the one very vocal and trying to tell us how we're gonna approach our approach to the South China Sea in terms of our dispute with China. So you have this element, the United States element in there, and they're the one, I think, trying to tell us, like, don't worry, we are here, your big brother, and we will defend you in the South China Sea if China attacks the Philippines in that regard. So, it becomes so complicated to the point that we compromise our good economic relation with China, and our economy is affected in terms of infrastructure, capital from China, and all of these things. So that is really the case. And the most important thing, though, is it's not just about diplomatic exchange of words. The situation on the ground is more crucial, because how many skirmishes already happened? And 2 days ago, 3 days ago, there was another skirmish that happened, not only in the Second Thomas Shoal, but even in the Scarborough Shoal. And usually we're shocked. Why is it that we attempt? It's like we're provoking something. when we know already how the Chinese would react. So if you know that the Chinese would react in this manner and it happened several times, you should not do anything about it. You should not do the same thing over and over again. But it seems it's being done over and over again. And even before it happened, Ray Powell already made an announcement in Twitter that something will happen in the South China Sea. So it's really crazy. Yeah, really. It's like
They even bring Western media on board, which is
they
very
would
convenient, right?
yeah, and also they would go to the South China Sea with all the Western media, BBC, CNN, and would would cover the whole situation. And I said, this is not how you resolve an issue or a dispute. It should be more quiet, more diplomatic, and you don't escalate tension. But that is how the situation at the moment. So the thing here is the United States is interfering in the South China Sea, which it should not, because it's not party to the dispute. But the way I see it, geopolitically speaking, is they have their own interest to protect in that area. And that's what you call freedom of navigation. It's not about commercial ships. It's about their warships, that they want this warship in and out of the South China Sea without anyone saying no to it. That's the problem. And but the problem also with the problem that the United States is facing is in ASEAN region, they cannot control ASEAN countries because ASEAN countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and even Cambodia, Laos, they have an independent foreign policy. They have good relation with China, and they will never allow themselves to be used as a pawn or a proxy by the United States. They can deal with the United States in a friendly manner. They have good relation with China and the rest. But it's only the Philippines that the United States under Bongbong Marcos can control and use as a pawn against China, using the South China Sea as an issue. Because I don't see any business for the United States really to interfere in the South China Sea dispute. It's not party to the conflict. It's not from the South. It's not even part of Southeast Asia, for God's sake. You know, they claim to be part of Asia Pacific, but they're not part of Southeast Asia. And they're not they're not even signatory to UNCLOS, but they're pushing us to use UNCLOS as a leverage against China. So this is pretty much crazy. And it's really also very weird because we Filipinos, we're Asians. Usually when we deal with problem, when we deal with dispute, we have our own way of dealing it that you don't need to escalate. Usually we want to de-escalate and solve it quietly. But our approach is very Western, that it clashes with the kind of approach that China wants. And what China wants is a bilateral negotiation and a multilateral negotiation at the ASEAN level. And to honor the DOC, the Declaration of Conduct and Parties in the South China Sea of 2012, and push for this Code of Conduct. But it seems that we're diverting from it as part of ASEAN. So, I mean, like, it's so weird. It's really weird. Well, there's only one common denominator of all of these things. It's really the presence, the strong influence of the United States in the Philippines under a Bongbong Marcos administration. That's very obvious. Sure. Everyone knows that. It's an open secret. If it's a secret, it's open secret. That's really the truth of the matter. I'm not saying this because I'm not a pro-American. This is really the case. Anyone who has a right mind and who can analyze, this is not rocket science, can see it clearly. And I think ASEAN countries knows these things. I think all in ASEAN can understand. That's why ASEAN countries are very uncomfortable with the Philippines at the moment, because we make our own decisions without consulting them. But we want them to be on our side, but we don't consult them. Like, for example, the deployment of Typhoon missile system. We did not consult them, but it's there. And and I think Russia and China are quite very uncomfortable about this, reacting. Malaysia also opposed this, and even other countries in ASEAN. I think they're not happy. We have already denied databases / US bases, and most of them. Yeah.
Do you think this will change when the Biden administration is over and the Trump administration begins?
Well, I hope so, because according to Trump, he wants a better world and a peaceful world. But the the one challenge, though, that I can see in a Trump administration is the appointment of 3 people in 3 important positions: the National Security Advisor, the State State Department Secretary, I think, and one more, Rubio, I think, would be appointed to another post. But the three, and these are hawkish, and they're to a certain extent anti-China in many ways, and these are some kind of people who would want to who would want to create more conflict rather than peace in the world. So I'm
Yeah.
afraid of that. But I hope Trump will follow through his campaign promises, saying that I want to de-escalate tensions in Gaza, I want to de-escalate tension in Ukraine, and I want to have good relation with North Korea. And in the Philippines, we will not come to a point that, we will wage war with China and the United States will not participate. We will not encourage the Philippines, or will stop and de-escalate the militarization of the Philippines under a Biden administration. Because my country really is being militarized by the United States at the moment, and the military buildup of the United States, when you talk about Asia Pacific, it's one of this point of military buildup is in my country. It's really the truth. You have 9 EDCA bases, and these EDCA bases are located in sensitive areas, facing Taiwan Strait and located near the South China Sea. And now you have a Typhoon missile system that supposedly should be removed last September, and now it's still in the Philippines. And I don't think, according to David O, from his information, it will not be removed anytime soon. And there's one undeclared. I don't know. I have to ask Dr. David O. He said to me, like, there's another undeclared missile system in the country. I said, really? Oh my God, that's one thing that I don't know too. You see?
Undeclared.
One thing that you mentioned, Anna, one thing that you mentioned in one of the articles that you published, because I follow what you write with great interest, was that one of your concerns is that the control of these missiles is not straightforward. It's very much unknown who actually has the hand on the button. Is it Filipino military or is it American military? And that is of great concern not only to China, but also to the Filipinos themselves, because any action that were to happen, who would be blamed? Who would take the responsibility for these actions? You also shared earlier today some information about some nuclear material that was openly discussed earlier this week, but it had been found a few months ago. If you could elaborate a little bit on what that is and what is the importance of such news being discussed today out in the open, and why now?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. First and foremost, when you talk about military assets in my country, even what you call EDCA sites or U.S. military bases, these are not under the control of the of Filipinos. In EDCA sites, these are an extension of America's military installation because these are considered as military territory, American territory or U.S. territory. Even our own president cannot enter EDCA sites freely, and that's that's in our soil. We cannot.
Australia has the same situation.
Yeah, that is really the fact of the matter. In EDCA site, even our own president cannot get into there without the permission of the Americans. And take note, it's in our soil. It's inside our country, but we cannot do that because it's considered to be American property or U.S. property or U.S. location. So they have some control over that area. Now, when you talk about prepositioning of military assets under EDCA and the U.S. military assets in the country, it's actually under the control of the Americans. And there are American troops and boots on the ground in my country. That is the truth. Because there is what you call BFA, the Visiting Forces Agreement. And the Visiting Forces Agreement allow U.S. troops to rotate and stay in my country, but in rotational manner. So they are there. They are deployed in my country. There's not big like you have in probably in South Korea or in other, probably in let us say in other countries where the Americans are deploying their troops because there are wars. But in my country, there's a contingent of American troops in the ground. And these troops are the ones who controls these military assets. Even I think the Typhoon missile system is controlled by the military officers, the U.S. military troops, not the Filipino troops. Because to be very frank, you need to learn how to operate these high-level military assets. And it does not take one day to do that. You need to learn and be taught how to do this. And I don't think our military would learn all of these things in one day or even a month. So really, that is the case of the matter. So if you ask me if we have control over the EDCA sites / US military bases in my country and even the military assets from the United States, I don't think so. Even we don't have the spare parts. If in any case something happened to it, we need to import. We need to ask the United States. So even that, like for example, if you have a military asset and you use it, Filipino would use it, or let us say a helicopter that we given to us and we use it. If it has defect, we need to ask them for them to fix it, and we need to get the materials from the United States to fix them. In many ways, they still have control in that sense. So that's how it is, really. So now, if you ask me, if there's something happen, who should be accountable? Of course, it's them. But do you think the Americans would really be accountable? Come on. In history, you have seen it already. You have Afghanistan. There's so many case studies for that. Vietnam War, Afghanistan, so many. Were they accountable? Did they really did something good after they devastated these countries? No, they left the country and
So,
the
talking
local
about
people.
leaving the country, Anna, I'm old enough to remember after Mount Pinatubo exploded, the American military were kind of out of there like a flash and pretty much abandoned the Philippines. You can do the
Yes,
clear up. You can worry about the thousands of illegitimate babies that are there. You can
yes.
worry about the poverty that we're leaving behind. Is there not a fear inside of the Philippines of this abandonment again? Because having the US military does boost your economy locally, but it is such a terrible thing to happen when they did what they did. I can't remember how old I was. I was probably 20 years old when this happened. But even then, I mean, I've read about it since, but even then I can remember thinking, wow, they got out of there fast. It was literally days later, America was saying, well, this is not our problem anymore. Is there a fear?
Of course, there are fears to that. But, the problem in my country at the moment is the media is controlled. And the
Yeah.
media is also co-opted by the Americans and in a way, or the American media. So you don't really see discussion in media or in mainstream media about the danger of all of these things. No, there's none. The only way for us, like myself, to discuss about this is in social media. But you have also to remember that social media is like a battleground of information. There are people who are pro-Americans who, they promote their own agenda, and people like me who are trying to educate the public. But, I have to deal with all of this pro-American people as well who are saying that America is good for us. But the mainstream media basically would never discuss about these things because the mainstream media are either co-opted by the Americans or controlled by the current regime in my country. So there is
Even
no
your
public
independent
discussion.
media. You
So
have independent media,
the independent media is struggling to survive. Of
right?
course, you need to survive, and is struggling as well to put their voice ahead, and to put forward, because you don't have a platform that you need a bigger audience. I mean, I'm really happy even right now that you are giving me a platform to speak. Because even in international media, no one, no CNN, BBC will never interview people like me. They will
Hmm.
interview people who are more pro-Americans and who will, and how they will affirm that everything is okay in my country and the Americans are helping us. But people like me, they will never interview me. That's one thing for sure.
I can assure you they won't interview us either.
But that's why I've created media without means, basically alternative information that people from the ground can share what's actually taking place in them countries, and then people get to hear the other side of the stories, the alternative to what is being fed in mainstream media. And I wanted to move on to this the concept of multipolarity. We just saw the Syrian government being toppled, and a lot of people are worried about, well, multipolarity. Is it ending? Is it a challenge to the BRI? Is it what is happening towards the future of multipolarity? But I wanted to focus that on the Philippines. What is the role of the Philippines in terms of multipolarity versus unipolarity? Um, Does Duterte Marcos conflict the future of the next elections? How would that frame and shape multipolarity around the world? How does Philippines play a role in multipolarity?
Okay, a very interesting question again. But before I answer that question, let me answer your question about the military,
Oh,
military grade uranium that was
okay.
this. I mean, as under investigation right now. That it's a military grade uranium that was. They're saying that some Filipinos were handling it, and the National Bureau of Investigation is now trying to get to the bottom of this. But the thing here is like the basic question in our mind is who brought this uranium to the country? Because Philippines, we don't have the capacity, we don't have uranium, and we don't even have the capacity to process this into a military grade. But it seems that it is in the country, and it was discovered in two areas, one in Cagayan and one in Cebu. And if you look at the EDCA slash military bases in my country, there is one in Cebu and there's one in Cagayan. So now the question is, who actually brought these materials that can possibly create a nuclear weapon in my country? Or is it already there for the longest time, but it's only now that it was discovered because probably there was a mistake in delivery or whatsoever, because it's under investigation. So this is a very alarming situation for us Filipinos, because as much as possible, we don't want this in our country, and as much as possible we have a strict policy even in our constitution that we are a nuclear free country, and even we adhere to ASEAN policy that ASEAN as a whole, the ASEAN region is a nuclear free region. But with this kind of news, everyone is asking who brought these materials to the country, and why only now that they put it out in the open when it already happened last October? Why now? Now it's December. How many months have passed? So these are questions. But yes, this is a new development in the Philippines right now, and people are looking at this issue, and we're trying to analyze, and we're also looking at how the investigation will end up, and what they're gonna do about this. And so far, Bongbong Marcos, well, he did not say anything yet, and I hope he will say something, but I don't know if he will. Sometimes he doesn't say anything when it comes to crucial issues. He's quiet. I don't know why, but that is the situation. Now, when you talk about multipolarity and unipolarity and what's the role of the Philippines, to be very frank with you, when you talk about the Philippines at this time under a Marcos Jr. administration, we're like we're like we're like a country that actually not really aligned with multipolarity, because we're like a pawn of the United States. We're like a semi-colonial of the United States. And when you talk about the United States, there are two agenda of the United States I can see, especially in Asia Pacific region, even in Southeast Asia. That's two things: dominance and hegemony, and to maintain a unipolar world. And we are somewhat a country being under the heavy influence of the United States supporting that. As you can see, we're militarized for the United States to be able to maintain its strategic interests and to achieve its goal of maintaining hegemony in the Asia Pacific region. And we're being used to that effect. That is the truth of the matter when you talk about the Philippines at this time under a BBM administration. Well, that's a reality. However,
Mm.
when you talk about how do you call that? When you talk about a change of leadership, it really depends on who will be the president after Bongbong Marcos, or if Bongbong Marcos will continue to be in office after his term. That's something not sure at the moment. It's something that remains to be seen. However, hypothetically speaking, if we will have a change of leadership and the president is more open-minded, believes in multilateralism, believes that the world is changing and there's such a thing as a multipolar world already emerging, because you have different centers of power, and the United States is not anymore the hegemon, but you have contending powers challenging the hegemony of the United States, like China, Russia, the BRICS, to a greater extent than other countries. And other countries also would want to have a multipolar world, like the global south, in to certain extents. I think the Philippines can contribute to that multipolarity, or ushering of the multipolar world, if we will have an independent and balanced foreign policy and neutral foreign policy. But that will depend on who will be the next president of our country. Someone who understands this thing, someone who has a worldview, who understands the dynamics of what is a multipolar and what is multipolarity is against a unipolarity, and what are the advantages of having a multipolar world. For the Philippines, is very important that we adhere to multipolarity, because that's the only way I can see that we will be free from the grasp and the clutches of the United States, really. Really. That's one possibility for us, that we can be on our own, that we cannot be a proxy, that we will be able to deal with major powers, but we're neutral and we're having our national interest at the helm. But at this time, I'm very sad to say that under a BBM president, because of the heavy presence of the United States and influence, we're somewhat a country being used to support that unipolarity. And that's the preservation of hegemony and dominance of the United States in the Asia-Pacific region. We're being used to that to a greater extent.
So it's important to keep an eye on the changes and the modifications to the Constitution, because that could, in a way, determine the future of this conflict between unipolarity and multipolarity. Jerry, we had talked
one
about.
Thing, though,
tell me.
Fernando, just before I forget, in our constitution, the present constitution of my country, it's very explicit in there that the foreign policy of the Philippines should be independent foreign policy. It's really there. It's explicit in there. It's just a matter of pursuing and obeying, or respecting what the Constitution have said when you talk about foreign policy. But it seems that the current president is not doing it, and that's even that's even the case, because one of the basic function of the president of my country is to uphold the Constitution, to protect the Constitution, and implement the provision of the Constitution. But even then, he is failing with that, because in terms of foreign policy, our foreign policy is not independent, and it's against the Constitution. Really, that's even the case.
There's another interesting aspect to that, and that is that it's also contrary to the Charter of the United Nations. It's also contrary to the Charter of the United States. These two things both say that the United States, any country, the United Nations says any country cannot interfere with the sovereignty of another. The United States has its own charter, the Charter of the United States, which specifically states that none of the states of the United States can interfere with the sovereignty of another country. And yet here we are.
Yeah, that's precise. That's really, you've said it well, Jerry. Thank you.
All right. Well, friends, we want to thank you all for watching this video. And the most important thing is, if you want information like this from the Philippines, do make sure to follow Anna on X, Anna Malindog-Uy, as you can see on the scroller at the bottom. She's a source of very, very relevant and important information about the Philippines. Thank you 1,000 times, Anna, for joining us today. Thank you for giving us your time. It's quite late in the evening. For those of you who don't know, we're shooting in the evening. Thank you, Jerry, for, also helping me to welcome Anna to the show. Any last words or anything that you would like to share with the audience, Anna and Jerry? So let's go with Anna first.
Yes, thank you so much, Jerry and Fernando, for giving me this opportunity, for giving me your platform to share my perspective on different issues that's happening inside my country, domestically, and in relation to international relations and regional politics, and even China, US relation, and even Russia to a certain extent. So thank you so much. And I think one thing that I would like our audience to understand is, I really hope that, we will be given the space and the chance to air our perspective, because we don't have that much space in mainstream media, especially Western media, and even our local mainstream media. So this is a platform that I really value, and this is a platform that I'm very thankful, because people like me, we only have the space in social media and in platforms like this. And so I thank you so much, Jerry and Fernando, for giving me this opportunity. It's very hard for us.
The doors are open
Yeah,
anytime.
yeah. It's very hard.
Well,
It's very hard.
I'd
It's a
like to just
struggle.
add something to that because, first of all, thank you, Anna, because you've enlightened me on what the Filipinos are thinking, or at least the open-minded, like-minded Filipinos are thinking, probably along the same lines of anybody who's critical of the United States. This is a situation that is being pushed to a point where it's not good for anybody, and it's the only winners will be the United States, and they'll be sitting back selling weapons. They won't be sending US body bags home. They'll be selling weapons as they're doing in Ukraine right now. So that's one thing we all need to be aware of. The other thing I'd like to say is I personally, and I'm sure Fernando would support me on this, would like to get you back to talk specifically about your human rights as well,
Yeah.
rather than just the Philippines, because you are actually a global human rights activist. And I know you've been involved with Timor-Leste, and as an Australian, I know a little bit about that story. So I'd love to get you back on another evening and have another chat, but specifically about that, because you really have got some insights that the rest of us don't have.
Thank you so much. Yeah, anytime, just let me know. Thank you so much really for this opportunity. It's a big thing for us, especially for people like me who belong to the critical set of people who kind of see differently the current administration of our president at the moment. Yeah.
All right. Well, friends, thank
Thank
you
you.
so very much. And well, without much to say, we will see you on another video. Thank you so much and take care.